No!
Yes!
Oh yeah!
Yes! It works. Good job.
Okay,
Xcom.
cool. We've done it. Holy shit. Screamy. Come on, we need
Yes.
a screamy.
Xcom.
Good job, bro.
Get you. From the rat.
Where's Kman?
Come back.
Where is it?
So I made a video on this last week, but I was so focused on this block.onBlockClicked method here that I completely missed this extinguish fire at the top here. And this extinguish fire turns out to be crucial to how we get Bedrock. Thanks for landmining for watching my video and noticing my blindness and letting me know. So what actually happens when a fire is extinguished? Well, this is what happens. So basically, it gets the where the fire would be, so that you know, 1 block away from the block you're actually hitting, checks if it's fire, and then extinguishes it basically if it is fire. So let's do a bit of live coding here, some live modification. So if we want to just test this out and set the block you're mining to Bedrock, we have to first, since it modifies the position here, we first have to save the old position. Old position is position here. So yeah, so this is going to store the position of the block you're actually hitting, which is not the fire. And then when we extinguish the fire, after doing that, we want to set the block at the old position, so the position of the original block, to Bedrock. Okay, so let's try this out and see what it does. So I've made a simple setup here. There's an instant mineable block right behind this fire, and I'm going to mine it while extinguishing this fire, and we're going to see if our modification we just made will cause it to drop Bedrock. And you can see it does. Just got silk touch on this pickaxe here. So just to be crystal clear about this, you want the action of extinguishing this fire to somehow cause this slime block here to be replaced with Bedrock. And we do that by causing the action of extinguishing this fire to load a chunk somewhere, like here, and the chunk loading will cause population, and the population will cause an end gateway to be placed and replace this slime block here, like I'm about to show you. If you're interested into the deeper theory of why we can silk touch Bedrock, then I encourage you to watch my previous video. All the theory in that's still correct. This is just new stuff that follows on from it. So how do we go about actually doing this? Well, we have this setup here. This red chunk here is ungenerated. So the next time it gets loaded, it's going to generate. And when it generates, it's going to cause a 2x2 area of chunks marked by the blue square to be loaded for the first time, and that's going to trigger a population on this chunk here, which is in the negative corner. And the population is going to cause this end gateway to spawn. Now, end gateways can spawn anywhere within the green region here when this chunk populates, and you can see that this end gateway is right on the edge of it here. So even though it's outside that chunk, it can spawn all the way over to here. And so basically, when the player extinguishes this fire, that's going to cause an update to these budded rails here, and the update is going to go round to here, and it's going to load this chunk and cause a population to place this end gateway here, this end gateway portal here, which will replace this slime block as the player is still mining it, and the player will then silk touch the bedrock that generates there. But how do we get the player all the way over to here next to an unloaded chunk in order to mine a block? Like, this is a lazy chunk even. How on earth do you get the player this close to an unloaded chunk? Well, that's what I'm about to show you. So first of all, we need to get as close as we can, you know, just with an ender pearl, because that's the easiest way to travel far in one tick. And so we actually go up to here with an ender pearl. This chunk border here is the border of lazy. So this is a lazy chunk over here. This is a fully loaded chunk. So there's two layers of lazy chunks, as you can see, until the unloaded chunk. So the ender pearl cannot teleport you into a lazy chunk. So the ender pearl goes as far as it can. Then we need to run all the way over to here to mine the fire. But obviously, if the player is here, it's going to load the chunk, right? So luckily, if we create a large enough lag spike, that is, you know, obviously players can't load chunks during a lag spike. But then the issue is, if the player is going to run this all the way in this distance during a massive lag spike, the server is going to think that the player has moved this distance in one tick, and it's going to go, nope, that you are cheating. I'm going to teleport you back over to here, which is how far I think you should have moved. Okay, so let's look into how we deal with all these problems. So first things first is we go over to here and, you know, throw the pearl. The pearl is going to land over there in the entity phase. So let me type that in chat just to show you what happens with the entity, what happens within the tick phases, right? Then in the same tick, also in the entity phase, but after the pearl lands. So the pearl lands and immediately teleports the player, but the player hasn't updated anything yet. The player's teleported. And then in the entity phase, in the same tick, TNT from this giant lag machine here will explode and cause a massive freeze up on the server. Okay, so also in the entity phase, TNT explodes, so the player is actually over here, but nothing has happened yet. This means that on the client, the player is free to move wherever they like without the server updating anything. So the client, as it moves around, sends packets. The packets are processed server-side at the beginning of the next tick. That's the next tick now, after the lag spike's finished. We're in the player phase, at the very beginning. That's when the packets are processed. So this is when chunks are scheduled to be generated. So chunks are loaded immediately, but ungenerated chunks aren't loaded until later in the tick. And chunks are scheduled to be generated at this point. And let's not get ahead of ourselves, let's go back over to here. What actually happens, just a little bit before we teleport, so actually a couple ticks earlier, is we have this player launcher here. This player launcher gives the player a ton of velocity server-side right before it gets teleported. And then when it gets over to here, player's velocity is going to be very high, and the server is going to now allow the player to run over to here in one tick, because the player thinks, oh, it's just gone over to, or the server thinks the player's just gone over to here because of its high velocity. Okay, so that's pretty much all there is to you know, how we get the player over to the edge here. And just for completeness, after the player phase, later on in the tick, so the block is also mined in the player phase, and then later on in the tick there's the player chunk map phase. and that's when the chunk is actually generated. So the chunk is then generated. Well, no, sorry, it's when the chunk would be generated had we not mined the fire and generated it earlier. So it's not too late. The player chunk map is generated later in the same tick. So that's pretty much how it works. So I'm going to show you how to get Bedrock in the world download. There's a couple of differences between how you do it in this world download and how you would do it in a survival world. I'm just going to explain those slight differences as we go along. But there's nothing too major here. If you know what you're doing, you would be able to do it. So first things first, this server needs to have a view distance of 12. Anything more or less won't work. That's just for this setup. You could make a different setup for, or you can just adapt it for different view distances. And the other thing is that for this setup, it's good to have do mob spawning set to false, because otherwise the Endermen can steal all of your TNT. Obviously, mob switch is a good substitute for that. And so the next thing is you can't log in to this server right before an autosave, because that messes things up, as you'll see in a minute. And this first bit needs to be done quickly, so I'm going to do it and then explain it. So with all that said, let me make sure that there's no autosaves coming up, and there is one. So let me just wait for that. It's going to be about 10 seconds. Nearly there. And there we go. Okay, so let me log in. Do this in survival. And in this chest there's 2 shulker boxes, and you want to put them in this chunk here. Okay, so that's what has to be done quickly. So what this is doing is these shulker boxes have alternating random books, and that save states this chunk. So this chunk in the world download is ungenerated, right? So once we log in, we generate it, and we need to make sure that that generated chunk doesn't save back to disk, so that next time we load this chunk, it regenerates again. And in survival, instead of deleting this chunk with mcedit like I did, instead what you would want to do is you would want to come over. You can just run to this chunk in between autosaves and place these instead, and it has the same effect. Okay, so the side effect of just spawning here is that we've already created an end gateway, so we need to remove that again. It can be done in survival, obviously, with any normal bedrock breaking method, like dragon eggs. And it replaced our slime block, so let me put the slime block back as well. Okay, and that's all we need to do to set up over here. So now we fly over to the other side of the contraption. Okay, once we cross that chunk border there and go over to here, it's important never to go back across, right? Because that will, because now that chunk has reverted, and going over early will place the end gateway, but it's too early, right? So next thing we want to do is we want a friend to log in here, because they need to load the chunks. I'm going to simulate that with a fake player, but obviously in survival, you can just have another person log in here. And now let's get ready. So first things first is the minecart down here is blown up every time, and there's no minecart in the world download, unfortunately. So we need to place this back. Okay. And then we need, just normal preparations. We need ender pearls. Let's get some food. And we of course need our silk touch pickaxe. Any pickaxe. I think wooden pickaxe is the funniest. Make sure it has silk touch. Okay. And that should be it. Let's go into survival. Make sure we're at full health. We need to be at pretty much full health, because this setup does take away about half your health. You're not wearing any armor, at least. Okay. And then in order to, because when we go over there, if we just walked over there, we could load that chunk over there. In order to prevent that, we need to run back and forth across this red line first, and then we can go over to this spot here. And as soon as we throw this ender pearl, we need to be fast and know what we're doing. So we need to throw the ender pearl down to that platform down there, get in the minecart, and get out of it again. Wait for us to be blasted. Okay, and then we go over to here, hit that with our Silk Touch pick, and as you can see, that extinguished the fire, removed the bedrock, and if everything went well, we can see that there is a bedrock item that dropped. So there's a couple of important things to say here. First of all, there is currently a bug in Carpet Client which allows you to, which basically counters the server's anti-cheat over there. So if you have both Carpet on the server and Carpet Client on your client, then you should probably remove at least one of them, because you know, I would regard that as cheating, because it's basically stopping the anti-cheat, which this whole thing over here is supposed to work around. So with that, there's also the our tool to find the end gateways. It's on our website, seedfinding.com/gateway. So if you want to build, if you're like a tech server or something and you want to build this yourself, that tool should hopefully be quite self-explanatory to use, and if it doesn't work, then yell at Neil. And next thing is some of these things here. So this and this might be a little bit overkill, and probably is an easier way to build this for survival. I'm leaving that to tech servers to design something better than we slapped together here. For example, already a guy named Terra, who I believe is from the Frostcraft server or somewhere, he suggested collecting TNT in lazy chunks rather than generating them all at once here, and that sounds like a smart idea. So there's lots of things that that could be done to improve this thing and make it more viable for survival or even for speedrunning. If anyone is interested in doing a Bedrock speedrun. And finally, I'd like to thank the Hekate server, especially the two members Xcom and Kman, for helping a lot with the actual construction and a little bit of the research here. And so yeah, it wouldn't have been possible without them. I've been too lazy to build this up. But anyway, I think that's all I have to say. Thanks for watching, and yeah, I know there's a panorama video coming up. This literally came up straight. This literally came out literally the day after the panorama seed was found, so I had to record this first, unfortunately. But in the meantime, Salsi1 has made a video on it, so you can watch that in the description, and me and hopefully Cortex will be making our own video in due course. But yeah, thanks for watching. Bye.